Hello and welcome to our Winter 2020 MCAP webinar series facilitated by our partners at San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Today is our first day of a 3-day free webinar series on the topic of understanding the core concepts and principles of universal design for learning to support English learners virtually. What a powerful workshop you will all be participating in. Please visit our website at www.multilingualcalifornia.org for dates of upcoming webinars and additional resources. You may also subscribe for updates of upcoming events and resources. My name is Dr. Alma Castro. I'm the director for the Multilingual California project. MCAP is a 3-year grant awarded to CABE in March this year through the CDE Educator Workforce Investment Grant. The goals of the MCAP grant are to provide professional learning opportunities for teachers, administrators, and paraprofessionals across the state for implementing the English Learner Roadmap policy. The MCAP Alliance includes CABE and 5 strong county offices of education in Butte, Fresno, San Bernardino, Orange, San Diego, and San Diego State University. The MCAP builds on a robust body of research highlighting multilingualism as the most effective option for the academic achievement of English learners across all content areas and for their preparation to participate effectively in the global workforce. Participants, as we get ready for today's exciting session, I have a few housekeeping matters to share. As this is a webinar, the speaker's microphone will be active and the participants' microphones will be on mute. If you would like to pose a question during today's presentation, please feel free to use the chat icon on the Zoom control menu. After today's webinar, we will also post the recorded version and resources on the Multilingual California website so you can access today's webinar and resources as well as share it with others. We value your input. At the end of our presentation, we will invite you to complete our survey. Please sit back, relax, and get ready for 45 minutes of powerful online engagement and learning for day 1 of a 3-day series. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce and welcome my colleague, Angelica Hurtado from the San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools, who will also welcome her team. Bienvenida, Angelica.
Gracias, Alma. Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Angelica Hurtado, and I'm the Program Manager for Multilingual Education at San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools. Today, I'm joined by a great team of presenters who make up the UDL team and the Multilingual Education team. We have worked together and collaborated together to provide you with these next 3 days. So at this time, I'm going to introduce the team and then we will proceed with our presentation. My name's Angelica Hurtado. I'm Program Manager, as I said before, but we also have Denise Cates Darnell. She's a coordinator with Pre-K 8 and Math. We also have Krista Ott. She's Curriculum Coordinator, Pre-K 8 in Literacy. We have Rosemary Hyder, Coordinator for Multilingual Education, and she works on my team. So here we go, team.
Okay, so today we'd like to start with the learning intentions over the 3 days. We are going to explore the UDL core concepts, the UDL design process, and the UDL framework and strategies. We'd like to make note that first of all, we have all our sources adapted from cast.org. We are all CAST trained and are using their materials with their permission. So what we'd like to do right away with you is jump you into an activity. We'd like to get the juices flowing and thinking about students and learning and universal design and what you may or may not know. So we're going to put a link into the chat box to a Jamboard, and we're going to have you read 9 quotes. Denise is going to show you the Jamboard so you can see what it looks like. So here's our Jamboard, and on each jam, there is a quote. So if you take the arrow up at the top, you can go forward and you can go backwards. What we'd like you to do is to read each quote, find one that resonates with you, and put a comment on that page. The way to put a comment is to, over here on the left-hand side, you'll see the tools. You can click on the text box. It's a box with a little T in it. It opens up a text and you can put a comment on that page. If you would prefer, you could do a Post-it note. Post-it note is also found on the tool to the left-hand side. You click on the Post-it notes, type in your comment, pick your color and hit save. And that comment will also be on the jam for us. So we would like you to go ahead and grab that Jamboard link that's in the chat box. Peruse the 9 jams. Find a quote that resonates with you, and please add a comment. We'll give you about a minute to do that.
Thank you, Denise, for dropping the link for in the chat box. I believe the link is there now, participants. If you're just joining us, there's a link on our chat box. Please go ahead and access the link to be able to participate on the Jamboard.
So what you're doing is you're scrolling through each of the 9 pages. Each page has a quote. Find one that resonates with you and add a comment.
Chris, I'm reading on the comments on the chat. Participants, thank you for sharing. It looks like it says that there's a traffic jam. There are too many people trying to access.
Okay.
Thank you, participants, for sharing.
Jamboard is jammed. I guess the name is appropriate. Okay, it does look like we are getting a couple Post-its on there. Am I correct, Denise, in what I'm looking at? Okay. So I will start to review some of what we have so you can at least see some of the ideas that are coming through. Creativity is nothing but a mindset free. This is refreshing, is one of our comments. It is through mistakes that you actually can grow. You have to get bad in order to get good. I can't quite see that comment. It's small. Let me expand my screen here. Good, we've got a couple on that one. This is essential for students, families, teachers, administrators, and everyone to know and understand. We have to tell parents, principals, and district administration that mistakes are okay. And I would say teachers as well. It is through mistakes that you can actually grow. This quote again. This quote reminds me of the importance of reflection and learning for both teachers and adults. Excellent idea. Another jam. Thank you, Denise, for moving me. Let's see what that quote says. This is by Katie Novak, this quote, and she is actually a guru to UDL. If we teach in only one way, some students won't learn. Love this. Totally agree. Teaching from the textbook. Absolutely. Yes, totally agree. Very. Yes, more ways are better than one. And Denise, let's take a look again at another jam. We did this one. Love this quote. Love that one too. Creativity is nothing but, oh, could you go back one, Denise? Creativity is nothing but a mindset free. Yes, I agree with this. Creativity unleashes imagination. Sometimes creativity is lost when we start teaching to the standards in our classroom. So we have to be cognizant to find a way to integrate both creativity, but teach to the standards at the same time. Denise, I think I'll do 2 more and then we'll pop into the other training. So this quote says, "The more strange and wonderful thoughts you put into your head, the more varied sources, materials you have to pull from." This is important when we start to lesson plan for our students. So true, liberating your creative thinking. True, and this is such a variable. Thank you. Denise, let's hit one more that I haven't seen. The
Kristen,
goal of,
this is Alma. May I jump in? There's one on the chat, and thank you, Adrian, for sharing that one. Mistakes is part of the growing process.
absolutely, yeah. Let me take a look at this last quote here from Universal Design from Learning. The goal of education has shifted from knowledge acquisition to learner expertise. I like to stop on this one because the goal of UDL is to help create expert learners. And so this is very true, a constant reminder. This one reminds me of Fisher and Frey, focusing on the reason we want students to read isn't to do a skill or to read, but to want to do something with their new knowledge. Our multilingual learners have expertise and it is sometimes overlooked. We will talk a little bit about variability and the expertise that students bring to the classroom that we need to consider when we're thinking about universal design for learning. So thank you for sharing with me. I'm sorry that it got jammed, but we did get some really good ideas in there and in the chat box as well. So we are going to take you to a Mentimeter here. Again, we're going to drop a link into the chat box. Hopefully this one won't get jammed, but we just kind of want to get a feel for where you are in UDL. What's your expertise in UDL? We'd like you just to open this up and just hit the button that best describes your experience with UDL. The first one being, I don't know anything. The second being, I'm somewhat familiar with the concepts of UDL, or I apply UDL concepts and principles in my classroom, in my role, in my experience. I think we typed that last word in there wrong. And then we will show you kind of where we're all sitting here today in our expertise as a group. Okay, so we have 3 responses so far. Let's refresh it there and see what we've got going now. Awesome, good. So we got 31% of us don't know anything about UDL. We're hoping to set a strong foundation for those of you who are somewhat familiar with UDL. Hopefully we're going to expand a little bit of your knowledge, give you a little stronger foundation as we move through today at 79%. And awesome, 16% of you are using UDL in your current role. So if you have any opinions, advice, please put those in the chat as we move through. Please feel free to comment when we bring up stuff on the slides. Okay. So we just want to reground and refocus ourselves as to where we're starting today within the 3 days. Today, we're really going to drill down on the UDL core concepts, leave you with something to think about before we start tomorrow's session. And so in looking at these 3 core concepts of UDL, we're going to start with the architecture of UDL. We're going to attach that to the neuroscience and the learning brain and how UDL connects to that. And then we're going to look at this thought that learning is systematic, and UDL helps us to plan with that predictability of that systematic planning of options using the UDL framework.
So I'm going to start by talking about architecture, that first key concept. And you can see on the left side of my screen, there's a beautiful old building. I wish we had great buildings like that around here where we are. But what I might also notice when I look at that building is that there might be some access that's difficult if you are someone that has a disability. So you might notice that the gate is very narrow and there's several sets of stairs. You might also notice that as you get closer to that door, there's a really small blue sign off to the right. And in the center of my slide, you can see that the sign indicates that disabled persons are directed to go to the rear of the building for access. Now we have to acknowledge that someone realized that that front entrance might be difficult for somebody with disabilities to enter the building, and they did something about it. They retrofitted an entrance to this building to try and help. But when you look at that entrance, you can see that it may have its own problems as well. It's much longer. First of all, we had to go all the way around to the back of the building to get to it. It's much longer. Parts of that ramp even look pretty steep and difficult maybe to access. And there could even be some safety problems as I was coming down that ramp. So architects really became aware that retrofitting buildings for access might not always be the best answer, the best solution for this problem. So take a look at this staircase here, and this is designed for universal access. The access is integrated into the design. The architects had to ask themselves some questions when they began to design this staircase here. So they had to think about who is going to use the ramp. Why are those handrails important, or are handrails important here? Who else might benefit from this design and who might participate in it? What might it be used for? So think about what you notice there when you're looking at that and how this area might be used. And just take a moment and drop an idea into the chat about what you notice about this staircase. Thanks. Jill said you can't even get to read the sign about disabled persons without going up all of those stairs. That's right. Okay, so I have a couple people saying all people can use it. There's multiple access points. It's much more accessible. Everyone's able to use that same place. There's lots of options there. I think of, as a professional developer, I always have a cart of materials that I have to drag from one place to another. So the ramp is a perfect option for me to be able to bring my cart up there. Or I can even see if I worked in that area, maybe at lunchtime, going to that area and sitting down at the edge of the steps near a planter box and having my lunch or picnic right there, so that it would be a comfortable place, even a place that I would enjoy being as well. So universal design in architecture is really an approach to design that works to ensure products and buildings can be used by virtually anyone, regardless of their level of ability or disability. And so as teachers, when we use UDL, we offer our students what architects provide for their buildings. We give them coherence, utility, and most importantly, we're providing access for all.
So I'd like to take a look at core concept number 2, looking at the neuroscience, where the big idea is considering that variability is the norm. In the past decade, there has been several research studies conducted that examines the living brain and how to better understand what happens when we're learning, during that learning, and how can we start to attach what we know about learning, and how we design our lessons. So even though there is no average brain, variability is the dominant feature of the nervous system. Like our fingers, no two brains are alike. So even though the geography and the anatomy of our brain is very similar as far as where we take in information, then where we process information, and where we decide to do something with the information, all that geographically is in the same location in all our brains, but our brains are all very different, very complex, interconnected and sculpted, and is influenced not just by our genetics and but with our interactions in the environment. So that is some variability that we have to consider, even though we know that parts of our brain is very much the same. What we do in those areas of our brain is different based on variability. All right, so we would like to have you think about an activity here called a waterfall activity. I don't know if any of you have done it before, but it's kind of a great way to get a little bit of collaboration and a lot of responses. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you each open up your chat box and respond inside the chat box to the picture that I'm going to show you. I don't want you to hit enter until I count up to 3. Once I hit the number 3, I want to have each of you hit enter at the same time and then start reading the chat box. You will see a waterfall of comments and ideas coming to the chat box based on the picture that I'm giving you. Okay, so I want you to take a look at the picture to the side here and think about, what do you notice? What do you wonder? I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to look at the picture. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Open up your chat box. Type something in, but please do not hit enter. Okay, if you have your idea in the chat box, everyone who waited, go ahead and hit enter. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Look at that waterfall of ideas coming in there.
Krista, we've got so many great ideas. All animals are different size and shape. Various
sizes for each person. I wonder what the store possibly could sell the same size to fits all. Who is that size? That's a really great question. Very simple, but who is that size? Not true. Exactly. One size never fits. Good, perfect, yeah. So the big idea of this picture, which connects to universal design for learning, is that difference and that variability. And that variability is that norm. Meeting the needs of only one with only one option isn't meeting the needs of anybody. Thank you. And so we really want to start considering that every student that we get into our classroom has a jagged learning profile. And even though we say, oh, that child is average, quote unquote, even average children have strengths, weaknesses, challenges that they need to consider. And so Todd Rose, who is the co-founder and president of the Center for Individual Opportunity, he says that human beings just don't line up perfectly. So when you see the red and the blue lines representing each student, neither one of those average students fall within the range of average for every learning area. And so we have to start thinking that when we start designing for our students, we have to consider all their variabilities. If I am teaching a lesson on math and I'm a student in math, I'm not that strong in math. I need to be very strong in ELA. So the content and the context of my learnings have to be considered as far as where are my strengths, where am I average, and what are some of my challenges. So every student has this jagged learning profile that we have to consider when we're lesson designing. So we give you another waterfall activity. Let's practice this again. You're going to look at a picture and you're going to open up your chat and you're going to drop in a thought, an idea, or a comment. And when I count to 3, then you're all going to hit enter at the same time. And then notice the chat for all the various ideas that are coming from the group. Okay, go ahead and take about 30 seconds. What do you notice? What do you wonder about this picture? Open up your chat box. Type in a comment, but don't hit enter, not yet. Okay, hit enter on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Enter. Ooh, 68 comments. Wow. Blooms in spring. What makes one grow can cause discrepancy for another. Depending on the environment, an organism can flourish or wither. I noticed that they're opposite seasons. I wonder why it's black and white. I noticed that depending on the weather, that's how plants grow. Different environments have different results. So really the big idea here in considering variability is that the problem is not in the learner. The problem is in the environment. And so we don't want to think about how we can change the student. We want to think about how we can change the environment for that student so that that student has the opportunity to thrive. So we are really connecting to that core concept number 2 of what we know about the brain and moving away from that notion of ability and disability, those who can and those who can't, to the idea of variability. We know that all students who enter into the teaching and learning environment bring with them this unique set of abilities and experience, and that those abilities and experience matter when it comes to their learning.
Right, and as Denise and Krista have been building our knowledge of UDL and discussing variability, we wanted you to remember the knowledge that you already possess, that you already have in your own toolbox, such as your knowledge of your English learners' proficiency levels. And if you're unfamiliar or need a refresher with this chart, we're going to put the ELD standards in the chat, a link to the ELD standards of the chat now. And this language proficiency continuum is on page 20. And just a reminder for you to make sure that you've reviewed your rosters and get to know your students, your proficiency level, what level your students are functioning at. Review this continuum for assets that our multilingual learners already possess. And if you look at the left-hand corner, at the high level thinking with linguistic support, it reminds us that English learners possess cognitive abilities appropriate to their age and experience. So in order to communicate about their thinking as they learn English, they may need varying linguistic support, depending on linguistic and cognitive demand of the task. So we're consciously planning on what type of support our students need at their level. Okay? And on the next slide, there we go. Just like all students, our English learners come with different typologies. And this chart was taken from the English Learner Toolkit of Strategies. And we're putting the link in the chat for you, just in case you're unfamiliar with the resource. And in there, you can find the link. Once you get on the link, you can find it on pages 9 and 10. And this resource really helps us in designing our instruction to meet the needs of types of English learners in our class. So for example, if you have a newcomer join your roster, you can refer to this chart for a quick review of characteristics and keep in mind considerations you'll have as you plan your instruction for your class. Now, if you have a dual identified student who's an English learner with an IEP, then please take a look at the California Practitioner's Guide for resources. And we can put the link in the chat for you if you're unfamiliar or just need a refresher. So on the bottom there is a quote from chapter 2 of the guide, which specifically talks about UDL. Because language is pervasive and inseparable from learning information in all content areas, planning for English learners impacts the overall design of all lesson planning, and depending on the language acquisition program, builds literacy in 2 or more languages. And this implies that the instruction for all in UDL has embedded English learner accessibility features, and you'll see the accessibility features for which all students may take advantage. And in chapters 2 and 7, the guide specifically discusses UDL and English learners with disabilities. And we'll put it in the chat if you'd like to take a look just at pages in chapters 2 and 7. The guide itself is over 400 pages. So if you want to specifically focus on UDL, it'll be chapters 2 and 7. Okay.
So as educators, we know that learning is systematic. We can predict how students will respond given various inputs. So we can use the UDL framework to plan how to support student learning. And that framework provided by CAST is the one that we're going to be using here today to talk about supporting that. So studies of the brain have confirmed that there are 3 main networks that are active during learning. We have the affective networks that are responsible for the why of learning, and they control the emotional involvement with learning, such as motivation and our ability to focus and remain engaged with a task. Then we have the recognition networks, and they control the what of learning. And they are responsible for receiving information, for forming concepts, and for being able to create that information so that it's usable knowledge and I can apply it. And then we also have the strategic networks, which govern the how of learning, and they're responsible for planning, executing, and monitoring our actions with the environment. So neuroscience has clearly shown that learner variability is the rule rather than the exception. And these 3 principles of UDL, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression, are designed to support learner variability and those learning networks. So the concept of neurovariability is important for educators. It reminds us that learners do not have an isolated learning style, but instead they rely on many parts of the brain working together to function within a given context. And because we know that these networks interconnect and act together in a way that's unique for each one of us, we can strategically apply those 3 principles of UDL by systematically designing options to promote access and opportunities for learning. So as we've learned more about the way that we do learn, we've moved from equality, or providing every student the same thing, although this does not necessarily ensure that every child succeeds. We've moved from equality to equity, and equity is providing students what they need when they don't succeed. So we've done this in an attempt to redress or retrofit the curriculum for access for students. What we need to move to now is to universal design, where we proactively remove barriers in the environment so that students can effectively access learning. So you may think that we have learned all of that, and we've been doing that all along as we've been talking about differentiated instruction. But a key difference here is that differentiated instruction is controlled by the teacher. As the teacher, I get to determine the options that are available for every student, and I direct them which one to participate with them. In Universal Design for Learning, I provide the options as the teacher, but the student gets to determine which option they are going to pursue and which option will help them to be most successful. So Universal Design for Learning views the learner variability as a strength or as an asset. It's something that we can leverage and use to support student success, not a challenge that has to be overcome. So we have just a few extra minutes today, but I would like to talk about tomorrow. So join us again tomorrow. We're going to extend our journey with more on the UDL process and continuing to make connections with the English Learner Roadmap. And we have just a couple of moments for some questions as we finish up for today.
Denise, thank you. I do see a question. Participants, please feel free to drop your questions on the chat. We will do our best to reach these. So there is one question. Susana, thank you for asking. How can this apply now that students are learning remotely is one question.
So great question. Krista, you want to jump in? I saw that you turned your mic off.
Go ahead, unless you want me to take it.
Go ahead.
All right, so we have been spending quite a bit of time thinking about UDL and options that we need to provide for our students in the 3 networks that Denise was talking about, as far as how do I engage my students, how do I get my students to perceive the information, and how do I get my students to act and show me what they've learned with that information. And so when we start talking about distance learning, it is just providing those options that gives them those digital tools to show us what they know and how we perceive it. So for example, and I think we're getting into a little bit tomorrow's presentation, but if I'm thinking about engaging students and trying to get them to learn, I can give them options to then engage them. Am I going to provide them a video? Am I going to provide them a screencastify? Maybe an audio. Maybe I'm going to provide them with a link for multiple choices to explore a concept before I start teaching it. Kind of a pre-teach activity. So I take a look at all of those principles and think about how can I get multiple options digitally to my students to engage in the learning, to learn what they're supposed to be learning, and then show me what they know. And so it's all about teaching them the digital tools and how to use them, and then providing those as options as part of your lesson plan.
And I think it's just a difference in the tools that we're going to be using in many of those, but we're doing the same thing. We're providing multiple options in each of those. We just may do it differently.
So what you have to start thinking about really with your lesson design is instead of thinking about face-to-face traditional environments and then the distance learning environment, instead shift your mind thought to synchronous activities and asynchronous activities. Which ones am I going to do online? Which ones am I going to do offline? And so that kind of takes away the stress of the remote learning aspect. It's just about synchronous and asynchronous activities and what might that look like.
Thank you, Krista. There's another comment. I think we'll take one more. Aaron, thank you for asking. Could you repeat what you said about how UDL removes the environment for students to learn regardless of their own environment?
I think what we were trying to say there is that rather than in the past, the emphasis has been on changing the student's behavior, changing the student's interaction, changing the way the student functions in the classroom. And what UDL asks us to do is, rather than change the student, think about changing the environment. So change the ways that they can interact, change things around them. So remember, we looked at that great little picture of the flower that looked like it was dying in the winter and was thriving in the spring. So what was wrong there? There was nothing wrong with the flower. What was wrong was the environment was not the right environment for that flower to thrive. So that's what we want to think about when we talk about changing the student's environment, is we want to make things so that student will thrive.
Thank you, Denise. And I do see other folks chatting about value what students bring, make it relevant.
Yes.
So much great comments and such a powerful session today. Day 1 out of a 3-day UDL webinar series. So we want to thank our colleagues for sharing such great strategies, ideas, tools, scaffolds, and resources in supporting English learners during distance learning. We invite you to also share in the chat box other suggestions you may have of topics for professional learning that you would like to see in the near future. In the chat, we've also dropped the link for today's survey. We ask that you please support us by completing today's survey, as it is a requirement for our grant. And this is what allows us to continue to provide free webinars in collaboration with MCAP and CABE and our partners through MCAP. Also, please remember to subscribe to our MCAP website. Our MCAP website is www.multilingualcalifornia.org, and the link will be in the chat. You'll be able to access upcoming webinars, resources, and events, and receive updates regularly. We also invite you to follow us on social media. Our handles will be placed in the chat box. And on behalf of our Multilingual California Alliance project, we hope that you and your families continue to stay safe managing the circumstances due to COVID-19. We are thankful that you're here today and invite you to join us tomorrow for our day 2 of this webinar series. Thank you again, colleagues. And again, please help us out in completing your surveys. That'll be your survey that'll be placed in our chat. Colleagues, are there any final closing words?
Yeah, I see a comment from Aaron in the chat. I think he's saying we actually are changing the teacher's way of teaching. The universally designing lessons. It's definitely changing the way we deliver instruction to students, keeping all the variability in mind. So we're looking at tier 1 instruction when we're looking at UDL. So definitely.
Absolutely. And just to kind of extend on that, it's really a mind shift for teachers to think differently about how they can change things in the way they present information, in the way they ask students to interact with the learning, in the way they ask students to show the learning that they've gained. So that's what we're looking at for universal design for learning.
Denise, I would just say one last comment is, sorry, Rosemary, I would just say one last comment that UDL is recommended by the California Department of Education as the best first instruction strategy under the multi-tier system of support.
I do see some questions in the chat about the slides. And yes, our recording for day 1, which is today, along with any resources, will be made available through our MCAP website. We'll drop the link on the website there. And remember that we invite you to come and join us for day 2 of more on UDL, supporting English learners during distance learning. That'll be tomorrow. Again, these are free webinar. This is a free webinar series, and we want to extend our gratitude to our colleagues from San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools for partnering and doing such great work and collaborating to bring these 3 webinars free to you and to any participants. So please feel free to share our website for other colleagues that maybe are available to join us tomorrow or perhaps on Thursday. It'll be the same time, 3:15 to 4 p.m. Thank you again for being with us this afternoon. We had such a great opportunity to engage with our teachers, and we look forward to providing additional professional learning opportunities. If you are still here with us, please help us by completing your survey. The link was placed on our chat box. And just a kind reminder, your voices matter. Your feedback is important as we continue to craft and develop professional learning opportunities for you that are at the forefront with our students on a day-to-day basis. We appreciate all that you do to teach our students, to make learning relevant, to validate, to value, as our participants, as our presenters shared today, the importance of that validation of our students and our families as well. Again, thank you for being with us this afternoon.